brings to the Western mind images of desert, images of oil, civil war, of bloodshed, violence. But the word Iraq brings to me images of reed forests, images of plentiful fishing, images of birds filling the sky, lakes extending as far as the eye can see. I hope the West will get to see my version of Iraq soon.
Looking at its landscape, you wouldn't imagine southern Iraq had been home to one of the world's most important wetlands. But as recently as the 1980s, this looked like this. An enormous marshland, 6,000 square miles in area. Fed by the combined waters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, it dominated southern Iraq. It was known as the Mesopotamian Marshes, and many biblical scholars believe it was the original Garden of Eden. What's certain is that for over 7,000 years it was a unique habitat of global importance, where wildlife and people lived in harmony. Then, in the 1990s, the marshes were virtually destroyed by Saddam Hussein in an attempt to eradicate the indigenous marsh Arabs. Drained of water, the region's biggest wetland was turned to dust. An interdependent community of people and wildlife wiped out. Since the fall of Saddam, however, there's been a concerted effort to recreate the marshes. My name's David Johnson. Together with cameraman Steve Foote, I've decided to brave the violence and chaos that still bedevil Iraq to see if the marshes can be restored. And to meet Azam Al-Wash, who is driving what is in effect the biggest habitat recreation project in the world. Steve and I also want to see if this wetland's amazing variety of wildlife still exists. The marshes were of crucial importance to a wide variety of birds, providing a vital habitat corridor for their migrations. Marbled teal, like these filmed in neighbouring Turkey, rely on marshlands to overwinter and breed. The draining of the Mesopotamian marshes helped make them a globally threatened species. It's a similar story with the Basra reed warbler. It takes its name from the nearby city of Basra and is rarely seen out of the region except on migration to East Africa. With its breeding grounds virtually destroyed, we want to know what's happened to this endangered bird. Our mission sounds straightforward, but that's without the Iraq factor. Since the 2003 invasion, this country has been torn apart by violence and civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. So why have we risked it?
We had an opportunity here to make a film about a hidden part of Iraq, a piece of Iraq that people generally are completely unaware of, and hopefully a positive story in the final analysis about a part of the world that just doesn't get a lot of positive press.
I felt that this was a film that was actually worth making, and the risks involved were worth taking. At the end of the day, this film is not about the bang-bang, it's about the tweet-tweet.
Before Steve and I could even set foot in Iraq, we had to have specific training on working in a hostile environment. It covered everything from combat first aid and survival techniques to weapons recognition and dealing with kidnapping. But nothing really prepares you for the reality of a place like Iraq. We travel everywhere in specially adapted land cruisers fitted with plate armour and bulletproof glass. And we're accompanied by a private security team equipped to deal with all eventualities. Our quarters will be the 2 US air bases in the south of Iraq, and it's pretty clear when we arrive at the Basra base that it's a million miles away from the comforts of home.
Pretty much the first thing that happens is you get a big safety briefing about rocket attacks and what to do in the event that the alarms go off.
7 rockets were fired into the base the night before last. It's, you know, this is real, this is happening.
Only with all these precautions in place can we finally start making the film. Our first priority is to meet the man who's at the centre of the enormous project to re-establish this unique wetland, Azam Al-Wash. Azam grew up in the town of Nasriya on the banks of the Euphrates. As a boy, he accompanied his father, a government water engineer, on many trips into the marshes. No photos exist of those trips, but these stills, published around the same time, capture a flavour of the environment he encountered.
My memory of those boat trips is that we are passing through these passageways that are surrounded with reed beds that, to my mind's eye, extend into the sky. These were towering reeds. I remember leaning over outside the boat and looking into this clear water and seeing fish. And I remember heat. And then every now and then we go out of these meandering rivers into these wide lakes, and suddenly there's this breeze that comes into you that cools you down. What I remember is a sense of serenity, a sense of warmth, a sense of love, a sense of being with my father, enjoying a unique place.
Azam treasured those memories, more so after fleeing Saddam's regime and settling in the USA. Then, in the wake of the 2003 invasion, he took time out from his thriving engineering practice to return to Iraq and see what had happened to his beloved marshes. But nothing prepared him for what he found when he arrived.
The first time I saw the dried marshes, the dried central marshes, it was literally a physical blow. It was painful. Seeing a place that you grew up in, that you have kept in your memories, green, full of life, birds, and it's a desert. It's dead. And then you look at the destroyed homes, you look at the remnants of boats, and you wonder about the loss for the people. What does it mean?
The indigenous Madan tribes had relied on the marshes for their livelihood. But as these satellite images show, the marshes, once nearly the size of Wales, had shrunk to less than 10% of their original area, far too small to sustain the local population. Fahid Al-Asadi, a family friend of Azam, watched it happen.
يعني احنا اهوار الجنوب تسمى نعمة العراق لما تحتويه من ثروة سمكية من تربية حيوانات. والله مشاعري تشوف الاهوار كارثة، كارثة بيئية، كارثة اقتصادية، كارثة يعني شلون توصفها.
Starving and terrorized by Saddam's troops, the Marsh Arab population collapsed from 250,000 to just a few thousand. Fleeing to elsewhere in Iraq, Iran, or further afield, most, like Fadila Yaba, thought their way of life had gone forever.
ما صدقنا النظام هيك يروح النظام السابق ونرجع ديارتنا اللي عايشين بيها احنا ما صدقنا.
But after Saddam's fall in 2003, a return did indeed become possible. Azam, following up on his father's old contacts, headed for Al-Kabish in the Central Marshes. So following in his footsteps, it's our next destination too. Of course, the security situation means it's easier said than done. Disguised as roadside debris, improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, are often used to attack the security forces. Sadly, private security teams like ours also constitute a legitimate target. The other main risk we face is kidnap, a prospect that's rare, but no less unnerving for it. To minimise both threats, we vary our route every day and try to avoid going to the same location 2 days running, or establishing any kind of pattern at all.
Well, we actually left our base over an hour ago, but we're only calling Azam now because, from a security point of view, we can't talk about things in advance. It's very much on a need-to-know basis. It really minimises the risk of kidnap. If we leave everything to the last moment, it makes our lives more difficult from a planning point of view, but it keeps us safe.
It's over 2 hours before we finally reach Al-Kabish. It used to be at the heart of the central marshes, but now it's dry and dusty, cut off from the Euphrates River by an enormous embankment.
If you came before the embankment was built, this was all marsh. This was reed beds all the way as far as the eye can see. This was where the water buffalo frolicked and lived. Now we come back in 2003. Well, this is essentially what you see. Desert plant, Tamarex. The water world had disappeared. Eden disappeared.
This embankment and its twin on the far shore are relics of the enormous engineering works carried out by Saddam to drain the marshes dry. 45 miles long and 7 meters high, they were built to prevent the Euphrates ever flooding this section of the marshes.
Every piece of dirt that was used to build this embankments was imported from the desert. You can imagine the amount of money that was spent in order to prevent the marshes from ever coming back to life.
But this is just a small part of the work Saddam carried out. Although it looks like a river, this is in fact a canal. Part of the network built by Saddam to channel water around the marshes, funneling it straight to the Gulf, over 150 miles to the south.
Part of me envies the engineers. I mean, it's an incredible accomplishment. Really. To drain 12,000 square kilometers of wetlands is no easy feat. It certainly is an incredible engineering feat. But it's a disaster of a project.
Seeing Saddam's network of canals at first hand, I'm struck by just the sheer scale of the work. It's as breathtaking as it is depressing. However, the Marsh Arabs who returned after Saddam's overthrow were resolute in their determination to re-flood the marshes. They dug breaches in the canal walls, but in many cases the embankments were just too big for them to tackle. Back in Al-Kabish, Azam was undeterred.
The Euphrates is right here in the background, and we mobilized an excavator and started digging a trench. The trench got to the water level, and then the water took care of the rest of the problem. As soon as the water started flowing, it started undermining the embankment and basically made this excavation the width that it is.
However, as people were finding out across the region, reflooding areas was just the beginning.
I come back 3 months later, and I'm standing on top of a bridge here, and I'm looking at the marsh, and I see nothing but red, stagnated water, and I'm saying, uh-oh. What the hell did I do? You know, I thought at that point I might have created, we might have created an environmental disaster. And eventually all the reddish stuff that kind of got dissolved in the water started going out. And 6 months later, reeds were coming back up, and it was amazing. It was incredible, really.
The seeds had survived nearly a decade of drought. And triggered by the return of water, new reed beds sprang up right across the region. It was a fantastic demonstration of nature's ability to recover from the worst of disasters. Even though our first sight of the marshes is in midwinter, It's striking just how large the reed beds are and how varied the bird life is. Pied kingfishers are everywhere. Capable of hovering for long periods in search of prey, they can swallow small fish in flight, an ability that allows them to thrive amidst reed beds that offer few solid perches. We see them nesting in the embankments built by Saddam, and it's obvious the species has thrived. Equally prevalent are black-winged stilts. With their distinctive red legs, they patrol shallow areas on the prowl for worms and small fish. Pygmy cormorants, a species exclusive to Southeast Europe, Central Asia and the Middle East, are thriving. We also chance upon wintering migrant birds, like this juvenile imperial eagle, which may have travelled here from as far away as central Russia. And in a happy echo of that 1980s archive footage, we spot a large flock of great white pelicans.
The marshes are like, well, they're called the Garden of Eden, aren't they? I mean, it is just extraordinary. It is just such a peaceful place.
It's an incredibly relaxing experience. In fact, out in the boat, it's easy to forget we're in Iraq at all. Another delight is seeing just how many of the marsh Arabs have decided to return to the area. People like Hamid Sasa.
جيت لجال الشبايش وبقيت في الشبايش 13 يوم ونزلت في ماكينة على الأهوار وشفت الأهوار معيشتها جيدة والسمك عاد لها والطبيعة عادت إلى الأهوار الطير والحيوانات الحشيش أي شيء يعني عاد الأهوار إلى طبيعته وعدني إحساسي أجمل إحساس يعني كان طفل ترك أمه من سنين ولقاها.
With wildlife and reeds re-established, the marsh Arab way of life is rising from the ashes.
What we've learned is that the people and the environment are interconnected here. What's good for the environment is good for the people. What's good for the people is good for the environment. So they're not separate. From the reeds, they build their own islands upon which they build their houses. From the reeds, they make mats for trading and bartering. From the young reeds, they feed their water buffalo. From the dried reeds, they bake their breads. It's the trunk upon which marsh Arab's life is built.
Steve and I also benefit from this plant's inherent strength. Getting panoramic shots out here is difficult because it's so flat. And Steve has to make use of whatever high point he can find. Out in the marshes, the only way we can achieve the same kind of photography is by getting the locals to build platforms for us out of reeds.
It's very strong and it's actually quite sturdy, but we've managed to successfully film some birds from it this morning. I think it's a testament to the building material itself.
It's not all been good news. A helicopter ride courtesy of the US military reveals that the restoration has been patchy and sporadic. It's a far cry from the endless wetlands that Azam knew as a child. And the situation was even worse in 2004. People were re-flooding individual sections of marshland, but there was no coordination between different areas, and no one with a coherent plan to ensure the marsh's long-term future. Having played a part in restoring one area, Azam decided to stay in Iraq and set up an organisation to address this bigger picture. Despite the chaos that was enveloping the country, Azam has had no doubt it was the right decision.
This is the cradle of Western civilization. Around the shores of these lakes, mankind built their first cities, or the birthplace of civilization, at least Western civilization, is on the edges of these marshes.
Or is where writing was invented, or was where Abraham was born.
And many scholars theorize that the marshes are in fact the site of Eden. Why work on restoring Eden? Eden is not just a state of mind, it's a place. It's in the marshes of Iraq.
Shuttling between his family in California and work in Iraq, Azam has established a conservation organisation, Nature Iraq, and since 2004 they've worked hard to promote the cause of the marshes and the marsh Arabs.
Some people think that we're silly working on the marshes in the middle of civil insurrection, in the middle of kidnapping, gangs and what have you. We take our precautions. We try to protect our people as much as we can. But you know, life cannot stop waiting for the civil war to be finished. And there's work to be done, and there's a next generation to educate.
Azam wants to establish Iraq's first national park in the Central Marshes, using the wildlife as its main attraction. It's all part of his plan to secure the long-term future of the region.
It is my dream to have this area become an eco-tourism mecca, as well as an archaeological mecca for tourists.
I see people arriving in plane loads, and even before making it to the hotel, visiting the oldest city in the world, or visiting Abraham's house, visiting the royal tombs. And then the next day, we would take them into staying in lodges in the middle of the marshes, taking them on kayak trips to see rare birds. This has to be a place where the rest of the world has to see, so that they can help us maintain it for the next generation.
It takes quite a leap of imagination to share Azam's vision. Although our accommodation is clean, it's not exactly 5-star. Instead of the hotel bar, we have a bomb shelter. And while there's no need to rush out early to bag a spot on the beach, there are other compelling arguments that prevent a lie-in.
It's just gone 5:30 in the morning. A little bit earlier than I would prefer to be up, but there's been some intelligence that there are some IEDs out on some of the roads that we're travelling. We're hoping to get out early before really any of the insurgents are up and about, and hopefully that will keep us safe. Slightly nerve-wracking, but all part of the fun of working in Iraq.
Bombs are one of the reasons our security team relies on so many vehicles. The scout car travels first, followed by our 4x4. If either of us break down or are blown up, the third car is there to pick up the pieces. The fourth vehicle carries all the heavy weapons. It's their job to extricate us when the bullets start flying. Thankfully, we don't encounter any bombs while making the film, but that doesn't mean the risk is overstated. In the first 6 months of 2010, there are on average more than 2 violent incidents a day just in the region we're working in. About half of those are roadside or vehicle-borne explosions, including one that goes off just outside a military base we're staying at. And Azam himself accepts that Iraq is a long way off becoming a tourist destination.
I cannot make this argument in today's Iraq, where people are being found headless in the street. This is not yet an eco-tourism destination. But these are some of my dreams.
Even if Iraq becomes a stable and peaceful place, Azam knows he needs to convince the locals, investors, and potential visitors that the marshes do have a long-term future and that the wildlife is here to stay. Which is one of the reasons Nature Iraq regularly sends survey teams into the marshes. And winter is a crucial time of year for monitoring activity here. Many birds, like these Spanish and Dead Sea sparrows, rely on this wetland to feed and roost in winter. And it's a key watering hole for millions of migrants on the long, hazardous journey between Eurasia and Africa. By recording the numbers and different species of birds passing through, the survey teams will be able to assess the general health of specific populations, a good indicator of the overall condition of the marshes themselves. And there's exciting news. According to some local fishermen, a large flock of marbled teal has been spotted in the central marshes. This endangered species hasn't been seen in this area for 20 years, so we've joined Azam and Chief Ornithologist Mudaffar Salim to see if it's true.
You know, in the chaos of Iraq of today, this is a piece of heaven. Just being one with nature, birds flying, the rustling of the reeds. Isn't this what heaven is all about?
It takes us half an hour to reach the lake where the teal are supposed to be. If the reports are accurate, it should just be a question of patience.
يسار القصوى يسار.
Yeah.
قاعد طير.
Incredible. Wow.
We're in luck.
Incredible.
A flock of marbled teal is congregating on the far side of the lake. What's really exciting is that there are far more teal than we expected.
You gotta see this. Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Oh my God, look at this. Look at this, Jesus. That is incredible. If you were here in 2004, 2005, when the water first arrived, you would have seen desert and nothing but tamarisk. And today you see reeds. Yeah, it's winter, and it's yellow. It's not as live. But the most beautiful thing is the fact you have, I don't know, 20,000? He says 20,000. I have no idea. I just know it's a black cloud of birds, and it's filling the sky, and it's just amazing what will happen when you let water back in. You know, when we tell this to BirdLife International, I think they're going to be uncorking champagne. I think, I'm not sure. It makes it worthwhile, all the sacrifices, missing my children's birthdays, missing my wife's birthday, missing an anniversary, missing the girl's graduation. You know, when my kids and my grandkids come here and we talk about the missed opportunities, there is something I can point to as this is the reason why.
It's an amazing moment. The sight of so many birds emphasizes the marsh's importance as a wildlife habitat. And it convinces me that this could actually become an ecotourism destination in the future. Analysing the photographs later, the team revised their estimates of teal numbers upwards. They now think there are over 40,000 in the marshes this winter, 5 times the previous highest count, and almost double the previous estimates of the world population. But we aren't the only people to spot the teal. These men are hunters, attempting to bag a few birds for the pot. Surrounded by a group of excited conservationists, I half expect us to rush off and confront them. But Azam knows that a balance has to be struck between the needs of the wildlife and those of the marsh Arabs.
We're not going to prevent people from going in there and hunting. We're not going to prevent people from going there and fishing. It's their land, it's their area. They can go in there and fish all they want. Fact is, the marshes need to be restored, but need to be restored for the people, not for nature per se. But both can benefit from this.
It's early April, and we're back to see what effect the spring floods have had, and to film some of the marsh's resident wildlife. To give us the best chance of actually seeing any, our security team has worked hard to set up a one-off overnight in Al-Kabish. It will allow us to film at sunset and sunrise when the birds and amphibians are most prevalent. The benefits are immediately apparent. The resident marsh frogs treat us not just to a chorus, but to a mating display as well.
Good. It's all good stuff.
Later, when we see the arrangements required for the overnight, it's pretty clear why we can't do this all the time.
We've got a 10-man security team working with us, and on top of that we've also got the TSU, which is the Tactical Support Unit of the Iraqi police, guarding us. So it's quite a big operation, really.
Slightly surreal, considering really they're only looking after Steve and I. So we're in this bizarre position where there are 30 people here to look after 2, which feels really odd. The thing is, I can't quite figure out, is it weird because there are only 2 of us? We don't need 30 to look after us, surely? Or is it weird because, actually, we do need 30 to look after us, and that says something about the environment we're in?
Either way, it's pretty peculiar, especially since we're really just here to film some ducks. Overnight is a success, although the morning is more of a smash-and-grab raid than a conventional wildlife shoot. Guards and guns rather compromise our ability to blend in. The light is nothing to get excited about either, but we do get a glimpse of an Iraq babbler. Its rather bland looks disguise its significance. This species can only be found here, over the border in Iran, and upstream along the Euphrates. The babbler is definitely a tick, but we are hoping to see some of the marsh's more exotic inhabitants. However, heading off later, Mudafa reminds us that just a few years ago, any kind of birding trip would have been impossible.
دراسة الطيور وواقع الطيور بالأهوار حلم، وكان حلم بعيد بالنسبة لي في وقت النظام السابق، لأنه كان من الصعوبة جدا أنه تحمل ناظور أو تحمل كاميرا أو تقوم مساحات حقلية ما ممكن، فكان أشبه بالحلم يعني. فالحمد لله يعني وصلنا لمرحلة بأنه لقينا نفسنا بالأهوار ونشتغل وندرس وبدنا نشوف يعني نقدم أحسن ما عندنا لدراسة طيورنا بالأهوار. مسرور جدا.
Initially, we see little except slender-billed gulls. Then, after a bit of wading to get right out to the edge of the marsh, we're rewarded with the sight of my favourite bird, a flock of crater flamingo. These birds probably breed in northern Iran, but attracted by the warmer temperatures, they'll spend several months here, moving from one brackish spot to another.
في حالة لما أرى هكذا ظاهرة فيما يخص يعني شعوري الخاص خطين متوازيين. الخط الأول هو النشوة والسعادة لأنه نشوف إنه الأهوار استعادت هاي الأعداد الأصلية من الطيور وتحتضن وترفد المنطقة بالعراق وبالشرق الأوسط وحتى بالعالم بالكثير من أنواع الطيور المهمة. الخط الثاني مدى شعورنا يوازيه ويساويه بالكمية والحجم، مدى شعورنا بالمسؤولية ويرسم لنا مدى صعوبة وجسامة يعني seriousness of مالت الواجب اللي يتحتم علينا والمرسوم لنا حاليا وبالمستقبل.
The job of conserving the wildlife here is getting harder. In fact, the whole marsh restoration project is at risk. And looking at the Euphrates River, it's immediately apparent why. By now, the river should be starting to flood, swollen with snowmelt from its headwaters in Turkey. In fact, it looks lower now than it did in January. It's the continuation of a drought that's been going on for nearly 3 years. And from a peak of over 50%, the proportion of marshland that's been restored has slumped to around 30%. The drought is not the sole cause of the problems. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers have been dammed since the time of the Babylonians 4,000 years ago. But recently, the rate of upstream dam construction has increased dramatically, and the marshes now receive less than a fifth of the water they did 30 years ago.
The lack of water is the result of dams upstream in Iraq, but mostly in Turkey and Syria. If there's enough water, we can restore 100% of the marshes. The hindering plug is, in fact, there is lack of water.
The dams are creating an additional problem. The traditional cycle of spring floods flushing out accumulated salt deposits no longer occurs. And as scientists like Nabil Hassan are seeing, the marshes are becoming steadily more saline.
You know, you can use this multimeter to take an indicator about the water quality, but the plants can give you an fast indicator. Water really now growing very limited, and in a specific area, it's less than before. It's make me sad, actually, because when you work in the marshes, you feel like each plant is like like your baby.
The water quality changes aren't just affecting the plants. Traditional freshwater fish are being replaced by species that are saltwater tolerant. Elsewhere, areas have dried completely. The few pools of water left, like those close to Fadila Yaba's house, are often stagnant and polluted.
الهور كان حلو قريب عليني هسه وين اروح حتى الظهور هو ما وصل صعب مو مثل قبل سهل الماء حلو هسه نشتري وكله نشتري ما تجاوز العام وسويت عمليه وما تدري هاي الشيء مره ثانيه وبقيت كل شيء كله بسبب الماء تصير دود ببطنها والسل وتموت من الماء ما اقدر اشتري الاطفال واشتري واشرب تشرب منها الماء الى غبار منها مات والله العظيم هاي تسوى لها 1.5 مليون وجيت من مليت وانا توني مسوي عملي شهر رمضان ومات نتحمل لنا سنه سنتين ولا بقيت على هاي الوضعيه هم نشوف انه يشوفونا
It's late May, the beginning of summer in the marshes. We've returned to Iraq for one final trip. Our main objective is to film the rare Basra reed warbler. Like these squacco herons, or these red-crested pochard, the reed warblers should be nesting now, and our best chance of seeing one lies in finding an occupied nest somewhere out here in the marshes. We also want to find out what steps, if any, are being taken to tackle the dreadful lack of water. If the problem is not addressed, then much of the work carried out to date will be for nothing. However, returning to the river, it's obvious that in our absence, Azam and his team have been busy.
Early last year, we did notice that the Euphrates level was dropping, which was, as a result, the central marshes were beginning to re-dry. In order to prevent that from happening, one of my engineers thought of the idea of building an embankment across the Euphrates, raising the level of the Euphrates upstream. And the embankment is now being built by the Ministry of Water Resources to actually rehydrate the central marshes, and the central marshes are rehydrating as we speak.
Putting yet another dam in the Euphrates can only be a stopgap measure. It's just intended to buy time, while Azam musters the resources to implement his grand plan to secure the long-term future for this area. To achieve it, he's taking on one of the most enduring legacies of Saddam's reign. This is the Glory River, the largest of Saddam's drainage canals. Until now, it's been left largely intact. That's about to change.
At this point in time, we're building a regulator at the beginning of the Glory River. I hope you will see that there's not going to be any water flowing here. All the water that's flowing into the Glory River should be flowing into the Central Marshes, where it will go to the National Park. With this water, we can restore the majority of the Central Marshes.
That's just part of the vision. Diverting water from the Glory River is like turning on a bath tap. But Azam is also playing with the plug in order to recreate the natural water cycle.
What we're trying to do here is to create a mechanical flood, as it were. We have a series of about 9 regulators, just about the same size as this one. We're going to use these regulators to kind of hold water in the winter and make the water go up and basically wet the dry area or the high areas, and then let the water go out in the spring, creating a small flood cycle for the Central Marsh. You know, it's a compromise, essentially. It's basically creating a small flood pulse as opposed to the large pulses that used to happen by nature. Moreover, the water that comes into the marshes these days does not have the turbidity, does not have the silt and clay that it used to have with the natural floods. So it is a half solution, but it's better than nothing.
The project's being funded by the Iraqi government, but was developed using money from Italy.
We have a small generator for them.
Thank you very much.
Several Western governments provide aid to help in the rebuilding of Iraq, channeling funds through specially set up provincial reconstruction teams, or PRTs. Here in Dikar province, the PRT is run by the Italians, and its head, Anna Praus, is a committed supporter of the efforts to maintain and extend the marshes.
I haven't been out here now in a few months, and I was smiling. I said, I am so glad I came out here, because at the beginning there was not much to see out here. The heart would cry when you saw it. Now you start seeing water, and there's fish again, and the birds flying in the evening when the sun goes down. It is, you know, it's good for the soul. Here, you just breathe the future. You just breathe that there is a possibility, and this is thanks to the wildlife.
That sense of hope is a valuable commodity in Iraq, because the deteriorating security situation could plunge the country back into chaos. The upsurge in violence is partly due to the inconclusive results of the national elections in March 2010. With no clear winner, the competing groups have so far failed to form a coalition government. In effect, no one is in charge.
No, on the causeway. Yes. Okay, see you then.
With just a few days to go, we thankfully haven't had to deal with any serious security incidents. But we still want to film the elusive Basra reed warbler, and today's early start looks to have been a wasted effort.
We've just had a bit of a delay this morning, an argument over boats. We'd got boats organised to take us out into the marsh, but one of the locals was arguing because we weren't using his boat, and the only way it was going to get resolved was by calling up the local sheikh and the local head of police to try and resolve it.
The boats that have come to pick us up belong to one tribe, but to reach us they've had to travel into another tribe's area, which is the source of the dispute. As the argument intensifies, it feels like I'm watching a microcosm of the parliamentary negotiations, and they've been going on for months. Being held like this in one place is never good from a safety point of view, and after an hour's delay, the security team leader decides to abandon filming. Visible for miles around atop an embankment, we're extremely vulnerable. Well, we can't just head off. Our police escort has called up a local detachment to guide us through the nearby town, so we must move the vehicles off the skyline while we wait for them to appear.
Roger.
Every new arrival is now viewed as a potential threat.
There's a pickup with guys on the back towards now, left to right. Second vehicle, mate.
Even the confirmation of their identity as the detachment we've been waiting for does little to reduce the tension.
I've just been informed by the TL that we're moving out in approximately 2 minutes. Robert, Roger.
Are we going back through Shukashuk, or are we...
No, we're going to go a different route. Just shows how a situation can get out of control over something as simple as using the wrong boat. It can easily flare up into a full-on bun fight, as they say.
But if we thought our next stop would be the sanctuary of our base, we're sadly mistaken.
Well, as you can see, things have escalated a little bit further. I didn't quite expect to be in the inside of an Iraqi police station. The guy who was complaining wouldn't take money, came to the conclusion that potentially there's another agenda going on. This whole area is now deemed potentially hostile, and we are now waiting for reinforcements to join us. The only thing that we can really do is return to base, regroup, and come up with a plan for tomorrow.
After 45 minutes, more heavily armed TSU squads arrive, and we can finally start the long journey home.
The guy who'd been kicking up a fuss over the boats and was subsequently arrested has actually turned out to be a member of the Mahdi army, which is a militia group, and that's just changed the whole perspective on that situation. The Iraqi police unit that was escorting us is taking it so seriously that we actually have 6 TSU vehicles with us now. So we are now a military convoy of 10 vehicles in total, which is a measure of how seriously the local police are taking this situation.
After all the effort to get us out to Iraq and into the marshes, the loss of a whole day's filming is difficult to stomach. But as they say out here, Inshallah, it's God's will. We can only hope he smiles on us tomorrow.
Going up this little channel away from all the other boats to try and find a Basra reed warbler nest. It's one of the indigenous species to the marshes, and as its name suggests, this is really one of the only parts of the world that it's found.
According to Azam's survey teams, Basra reed warblers were nesting here last year. We're hoping that the drying of the marshes hasn't prevented their return.
Hang on. Can you see it here, David?
Steve spots a nest.
Yeah, if necessary, I'll go and stand in the water and do it.
But is it still in use?
Yeah, let's go back here.
We're in luck, and we get our first view of one of the world's rare birds, a Basra reed warbler. Its unspectacular appearance belies the magnitude of the moment. This bird which breeds here and virtually nowhere else, embodies the spirit of the Mesopotamian marshes. If it can recover, then it speaks volumes for the whole rehabilitation project. And despite the drought, surveys show its breeding range is greater now than at any time since 2003.
This is what I love about my job. This is what makes you work harder to make other places come back. Yeah, this is the best part of my job.
Successes like this are part of what keeps Azam and his colleagues going. And if the challenges ahead over water supply or any other threat seem daunting, it's important to remember the progress that's been made after the virtual destruction of this unique environment.
Whenever I'm inside the marshes, I feel at peace. Listening to the sound of the wind going through the rushes, sounds of birds calling in the distance, it's wonderful to have that feeling back again, especially when you contrast it to 2003, when there was nothing but desert and sand in your ears and nose.
It's that contrast between the devastation wrought by Saddam and the areas of marshes that have been restored that continues to give hope, not just for the Mesopotamian marshes, but also for other parts of the world that have suffered because of mankind's lack of respect.
In many ways, the restoration of the marshes mirrors the restoration of Iraq. There's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But you know what? Directionally, we're on the right track. The future is good. All you need is to have the will and persist. And if we can restore this, Iraq can be restored too.